"Are you deaf, old man?" I said. "Move it." The voice, sharp and serrated, cut through the quiet hum of the barracks. Willie Pratt didn't flinch. At 81, he'd learned that the loudest noises were often the least threatening. He continued his work, guiding the wet mop in slow, overlapping arcs, the scent of bleach and pine rising from the freshly cleaned linoleum. The floor gleamed under the fluorescent lights, a perfect mirror of the ceiling above. The voice belonged to Petty Officer Thorne, a man carved from granite and impatience. He stood with 2 other SEAL candidates, all of them radiating the restless, predatory energy of caged lions. They were young, their muscles coiled like springs under their tight t-shirts, their faces still holding the arrogant certainty that the world was something to be conquered, not endured. "I've got a gear inspection in 10 and you're polishing the floor like it's the crown jewels," Thorne snapped, taking a step closer. His boots, spotless and black, stopped just shy of the wet floor, a small island of defiance in Willie's sea of clean. "This is a barracks, not a ballroom. Get your bucket and go." Willie finished his arc, his movements unhurried, economical. He straightened his back, a slow creaking process that seemed to annoy Thorne even further. Willie's eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, met the petty officer's. They were calm, observant, and held a depth that Thorne mistook for senility. "Almost done, son," Willie said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. It wasn't defiant, merely factual. "I'm not your son," Thorne sneered. The other 2 candidates chuckled, a low rumble of pack-animal amusement. "I'm the guy telling you to get out of the way, now." The confrontation had drawn a small audience. A few other trainees, fresh from their morning run, lingered by their bunks, pretending to sort their gear while their eyes flickered toward the scene unfolding in the central corridor. This was Thorne's domain, and the old janitor had trespassed on his authority. Thorne was a star in the brutal constellation of basic underwater demolition/SEAL training. He was faster, stronger, and meaner than almost anyone else in his class. He thrived on the pain, on the instructors screaming, on the frigid shock of the Pacific. He saw the world as a hierarchy of strength, and the stooped, frail man with the mop was at the absolute bottom, an obstacle, a ghost who haunted the edges of their elite world, smelling of disinfectant and irrelevance. "You know," Thorne said, circling Willie slowly, "I don't think you should be in here at all. This is a secure area. We have mission-critical equipment, training protocols. What's to stop you from being some kind of spy, listening in, poking around?" Willie leaned on his mop, his gnarled hands resting on the worn wooden handle. "I have a clearance." They checked. Thorne scoffed, stopping directly in front of Willie, forcing the old man to crane his neck to look up at him. "You look like you couldn't remember your own name. Let me see some ID." The demand hung in the air, a deliberate escalation. A janitor didn't get asked for ID by a trainee. It was a power play, a public humiliation. Willie's gaze didn't waver. He simply reached into the pocket of his red coveralls and pulled out a worn, cracked leather wallet. His movements were steady, betraying no anger or fear. He was an island of calm in a sea of simmering testosterone. He fumbled for a moment with the plastic sleeve, his arthritic fingers struggling with the task. Thorne let out an exaggerated sigh. "Any day now, Grandpa. We've got a war to train for." Finally, Willie slid out his base access identification card and held it out. Thorne snatched it from his hand. He glanced at it, then back at Willie, a smirk playing on his lips. "Willie Pratt." "Well, Willie Pratt, your picture looks like it was taken before color was invented." He didn't return the card. Instead, his eyes drifted down to the collar of Willie's coveralls. Pinned there was a small, tarnished piece of brass. It was nondescript, barely larger than a thumbnail, with no discernible markings from a distance. It looked like a piece of junk, something found in a gutter and pinned on for no reason. Thorne reached out and flicked it with his finger. "What's this?" "Your perfect attendance award from the sanitation department." The moment his finger touched the metal, the world shifted for Willie. It wasn't a memory, not a full one. It was a flash of sensations, a ghost of a life lived decades ago, the suffocating wet wool heat of a jungle canopy, the metallic tang of blood in his mouth, the rhythmic thumping of helicopter blades cutting through thick, humid air, the oppressive weight of a friend's body slung over his shoulder, the whisper of a dying man's last words against his ear, the glint of that same piece of brass, not tarnished then but new and gleaming, pressed into his palm by a hand that was already growing cold. It was over in a second, a phantom limb of a past he never spoke of. He blinked, the fluorescent lights of the barracks returning, bright and sterile. He was just an old man leaning on a mop. From a doorway across the hall, Master Chief McIntyre watched the scene unfold, his arms crossed over his chest. Mac was a living legend in the teams, A man who had been through the hell of Bud/ before Thorn was even born. He had a face like a roadmap of every war zone from the last 30 years, and eyes that missed nothing. He had seen Thorn's type before. Strong, capable, but with an arrogance that was a liability, a cancer in a unit. But it wasn't Thorn's bullying that held Mac's attention, it was the janitor. He saw the old man's stillness, the utter lack of fear or indignation. It was a profound and unsettling calm. The kind Mac had only ever seen in men who had walked through the very worst of the fire and come out the other side made of something other than flesh and bone. He watched as Thorn flicked the pin on the old man's collar. Mac squinted, his eyes sharp. He couldn't make out the pin, but he recognized the man's posture. It was the posture of a man who was so fundamentally dangerous that he no longer had any need to prove it. Thorn, meanwhile, was enjoying his performance. He held Willie's ID hostage, dangling it between his thumb and forefinger. The crowd of trainees had grown. No one intervened. This was Thorn's show. "I'm thinking this ID might be fake," Thorn said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I think we need to have the MPs sort this out. A man your age, with your condition, you could be a security risk." He took another step, invading Willie's personal space, using his physical size to loom and intimidate. The air crackled with tension. Willie simply stood his ground, his pale blue eyes fixed on Thorn, his expression unreadable. Master Chief McIntyre had seen enough. He didn't step forward. He didn't shout. That would only give Thorn the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, he quietly uncrossed his arms, pulled his phone from his pocket, and turned away, melting back into the shadows of the doorway. He scrolled through his contacts, past names labeled S2, Armory, and Rangemaster, until he found the one he was looking for. He pressed the call button and lifted the phone to his ear. The audience in the barracks was now convinced they were about to see an old man arrested, or at least hauled off for questioning. They were about to witness the peak of Thorn's dominance. They and Thorn himself had no idea that help was already on the way. They didn't know that Master Chief McIntyre's call wasn't going to the military police on base. It was going to a number he hadn't dialed in over 5 years. A direct line. "Sir," Mac said, his voice low and urgent, keeping it out of earshot of the drama in the hall. "It's McIntyre. Sorry to bother you, but you're not going to believe this. I'm at the Bud/Barracks, and I think I'm looking at Willie Pratt." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Yes, sir," Mac continued, his eyes glancing back at the scene. "The Willie Pratt. He's cleaning the floor." The response on the other end of the line was immediate and explosive. Mac listened for a moment, his expression grim. "Yes, sir. Petty Officer Thorn. He's got him cornered now. I think you need to get here fast." He ended the call, a sense of grim certainty settling over him. The cavalry was coming, and Thorn was about to learn a lesson that no amount of surf torture or log PT could ever teach him. Inside a sprawling mahogany-paneled office at Naval Special Warfare Command Headquarters, 12 miles away, Rear Admiral Franklin Pace slammed his phone down into its cradle. The polished wood vibrated from the impact. His aide, a young, crisp lieutenant, jumped in his chair. "Sir?" Admiral Pace stood up, his face a thundercloud. He was a man known for his icy calm, a commander who had navigated complex global operations from the quiet of his command center without ever raising his voice. That calm had just been shattered. "Get my car," he barked, striding towards the door and grabbing his cover from its stand. "Now, and get the base commander on the line. Tell him to meet me at the BOD/Barracks, Bravo Company, 5 minutes ago. Tell him we have a Code L event." The lieutenant, pale-faced, fumbled with his phone. He had never heard of a Code L. It wasn't in any of the manuals. "Sir, what is a Code L?" Admiral Pace paused at the door, turning back to fix the young officer with a stare that felt like it could strip paint. "L stands for legend. It means a living Medal of Honor or Distinguished Service Cross recipient is on this base, unescorted and unrecognized. In this case, it means God himself is on our soil, and one of our people is apparently spitting in his face. Move." The lieutenant scrambled into action, his hands flying across his phone as the admiral swept out of the office. The entire command staff was jolted into a state of high alert. A Code L. No one knew what it meant, but they knew the admiral's tone. It was the sound of a world about to be turned upside down. Back in the barracks, Thorn was pushing his advantage to its breaking point. Willie's silence was infuriating him, making him feel oddly powerless despite his physical dominance. He needed to provoke a reaction, to make the old man crack. "That's it. I'm done with this," Thorn declared, puffing out his chest. He reached out and grabbed Willie's thin arm. The muscle beneath the loose fabric of the coveralls was surprisingly hard, like old rope. "You're coming with me. We're going to have a nice long chat with base security. Maybe they can figure out what an old relic like you is doing here." He started to pull Willie toward the main door. It was the ultimate act of hubris, the final step over a line he didn't even know